Hello and welcome to Module 3. This is Dr. Daisy Raphael's introduction to anti-Black racism and resistance in Canada. Anti-Black racism is a particular form of racism that perpetuates stereotypes about Black people. It has roots in the transatlantic slave trade and segregation. When it comes to anti-Black racism, Canadians tend to learn about the history of slavery south of the border and the Underground Railroad in which abolitionists helped enslaved Black people escape to abolitionist states and to Canada. Black historian Afua Cooper explains, however, that the story of the Underground Railroad perpetuates a myth that Canada has always been a safe haven for Black people. In this lecture, I'll discuss histories of anti-Black racism in Canada and Edmonton in order to help explain why anti-Black racism and resistance to anti-Black racism have local, national, and international significance. In her book, The Hanging of Angélique, The Untold Story of Canadian Slavery and the Burning of Montreal, historian Cooper presents a history of slavery in Canada. Through the story of Marie-Joseph Angélique, which you can learn about in the Tale of a Rebel Slave video, Cooper demonstrates that slavery wasn't as Canadian as it was American. For example, British North America passed the Imperial Act in 1790, which encouraged British people living in America to move north by allowing the importation of Black people as slaves duty-free. In 1793, Upper Canada Lieutenant Governor John Simcoe tried to legislate the abolition of slavery, but met resistance from politicians, some of course, who were slave owners themselves, who argued that slavery was necessary for the emerging settler colony. In 2006, Cooper explains that as some of the northern states abolished slavery, Black people in Upper Canada actually fled south to America in what she calls the reverse Underground Railroad. In Upper and Lower Canada, slavery was not as widespread as it was in America, but this was not because of moral opposition to slavery. Rather, slavery was not as prevalent because Canadian agriculture did not operate on the same large scale as American agriculture did in the southern states. So this may be a surprise to you, and in fact, when I first learned of it, it was a shock to me, and a rethinking of my sense of Canadian always being the goodness of Canadianness, which I struggle with the more I learn about settler colonialism as well, colonialism. The British Empire abolished slavery in 1833, but this did not mean an end to anti-Black racism in Upper and Lower Canada and the provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, which Nova Scotia are home to some of Canada's first Black communities, composed of descendants of around 1,500 Black loyalists who migrated between 1783 and 1785, and a later wave of Black immigrants following the War of 1812. Desmond Cole's documentary, The Skin We're In, tells stories of United Empire loyalists. These communities experienced racism and segregation. Black Nova Scotians established settlements on Africaville, near present-day downtown Halifax. The story of Africaville is an example of anti-Black racism that has been endemic to Canadian society before and after Confederation. The city of Halifax gradually encroached on Africaville, turning it into toxic space by locating an oil plant storage facility, a slaughterhouse, a tar factory, a prison, and a city dump in close proximity. By the 1960s, the city of Halifax dismantled and destroyed Africaville, evicting its residents. We've seen the same kind of behavior in North America, in Europe, and in other places on the globe which have experienced settler colonialism. in which communities, for example, in the southern states, planned freeways through Black American neighborhoods and other kinds of egregious activities like that. Though Canada has a reputation as a multicultural society, University of Calgary scholar and Trudeau Foundation fellow Dr. Melinda S. Smith writes in a 2003 chapter titled Race Matters and Race Manners that Canada has only experimented with racial equality since the 1960s. After Black loyalists settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in the early 19th century, Canada restricted Black immigration, admitting less than 1,000 Black immigrants between 1896 and 1912, a period in which Canada recruited around 2 million immigrants to settle in the plains. Immigration policies in post-Confederation Canada identified Black people as unfit for life in Canada. Instead, immigration policies attempted to produce a white nation, discouraging those deemed unsuitable from coming. For instance, in 1885, John A. Macdonald argued regarding African and Asian people, it is not desired that they come. Should they have a mongrel race, that the Aryan character of the future of British America should be destroyed. The 1910 Immigration Act, written by Member of Parliament Frank Oliver, after whom Edmonton's popular Oliver neighborhood was named, although the name has now changed, stipulated that some immigrants may be deemed unsuitable and undesirable due to their peculiar customs, habits, or modes of life, putting me in mind of Stephen Harper's decision to develop kind of a tip line on practices and Canadian practices, for which, one of the reasons for which he lost a federal election. In 1911, after approximately 500 Black settlers migrated to Saskatchewan and Alberta, the city of Edmonton passed a resolution to ban Black people from the city, and in 1924 resolved to exclude Black people from pools and parks. The Separate Schools Act of 1891 permitted racial segregation in Canadian schools in Alberta, and there were segregated schools until the 1960s. You can read about the story of Toll School in the Amber Valley on the Canadian Museum of History website. The last segregated school in Ontario did not close until 1965, and the last segregated school in Nova Scotia, Lincolnville School, closed in 1983, only 40 years ago. Beginning in the mid-20th century, Canada began admitting more Black migrants under particular conditions. For example, in 1955, Black women, many from the Caribbean, were permitted to come to Canada as domestic workers under the West Indian Domestic Scheme. Much like migrant caregivers today, these women worked very long hours for low pay. Afua Cooper describes this as a form of indentured labor. In the 1960s, the Government of Canada liberalized immigration policy, transitioning from its implicit white Canada policy, focused on attracting migrants from Europe to a points-based system, wherein immigrants are admitted to Canada based on professional skills, education, work experience, and language skills. While this system is subject to important critiques, including its tendency to privilege men as migrants, since women's labor is not perceived to be as valuable, quelle surprise, this new system opened up immigration from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Today, most migrants come to the West from countries in the global South. This is a brief overview of patterns of anti-Black racism, exclusion, and inclusion in Canada. While this history presents examples of anti-Black racism, it's important to focus equally on Black resistance. As Afua Cooper writes, if the history of Black peoples in Canada is marked by oppression and domination, It is also marked by agency and resistance. Studying examples of Black women who have resisted racism, including women like Lulu Anderson and Rosemary Brown, for example, reveals the way Black women have contributed to a more inclusive and equitable society. So, there you go, a disturbing history of Canada up until, well, the 1980s. Well, what can I tell you about things that I have learned this week in in the Module 2 week? Things are settling down for you all. You seem to be finding what you need in the modules. Several of you have asked if it's too early to develop a challenge. Of course, it's not. Remember that the first group of challenges is due in less than a month. So if you want to do a challenge from that first group, please get on it. A question that I had today was, if I do something like a drawing or a painting or something like that, do I also have to write something? And my response was, well, if you do something like a painting, for example, you need to also include a piece that describes why this painting represents the challenge or how this painting answers the challenge that you have. And remembering to include 2 references from the module. So if you're doing something creative, I'm very, very happy. But don't forget that you also need to have some text that lets us know what your goal is in this challenge, and how what you have submitted answers that challenge. So carry on and enjoying the discussions in the module, and we'll see you next week.